The day began like any other Sunday for Alina Rodriguez and her mother, Sophia. They had their usual routine, morning coffee at home, and then a trip to Westfield Mall to browse the sales and enjoy lunch at their favorite restaurant. Neither could have predicted that this ordinary outing would end with a hospital visit, police officers, and the beginning of a neighborhood war that would eventually consume their entire community. Sophia Rodriguez, at 58, was a pillar of strength in their household. A widowed immigrant who had worked as a housekeeper for 20 years to put Elena through college, she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the occasional prejudice she encountered. Elena had begged her to retire, but Sophia insisted on continuing to work for the Henderson family in the affluent Oak Ridge Estates, a gated community with immaculate lawns, HOA regulations as thick as novels, and neighbors who measured their worth by square footage. "The blouse you picked looks beautiful on you, Mama," Elena said as they exited the department store, shopping bags in hand. "Mrs. Henderson will finally stop nagging you about dressing appropriately for her precious neighborhood." Sophia smiled but shook her head. "Carrillo, Patricia Henderson is not so bad. She just wants everything perfect." Elena bit her tongue. Her mother always saw the good in people, even when they didn't deserve it. Patricia Henderson, treasurer of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, was notorious for her complaints about everything from the color of mailboxes to the ethnicity of service workers entering the community. "Let's get lunch before we head home," Elena suggested, guiding her mother toward the food court. "I'm starving." After their meal, Sophia excused herself to use the restroom while Elena waited with their packages. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Concern began to gnaw at Elena's stomach. Just as she was about to check on her mother, screams erupted from the direction of the women's restroom. Elena's heart dropped. She abandoned their shopping bags and ran. Inside the restroom, she found chaos. The sharp smell of bleach burned her nostrils. 2 teenage girls stood frozen by the sinks, recording with their phones. And there was her mother. Sophia was on her knees, hands covering her face, her new blouse soaked and discolored. Standing over her was a blonde woman in designer athleisure wear, an empty travel-sized bleach bottle in her manicure hand. Elena recognized her immediately. Deborah Whitman, HOA president of Oak Ridge Estates and Patricia Henderson's closest friend. "You people need to learn your place." Deborah was shouting, her face contorted with rage. "I've seen you stealing supplies from Patricia's house. Did you think no one was watching?" Elena rushed to her mother's side. "What have you done?" she screamed, cradling her mother's face. Sophia's eyes were red and swollen, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She attacked me," Sophia whispered through ragged breaths. "I was just washing my hands." "She was going through my purse," Deborah countered, pointing to her designer bag on the counter. "Just like she steals from the Hendersons." Mall security arrived, followed quickly by paramedics. As they treated Sophia for chemical burns to her eyes and skin, Elena noticed the teenagers who had recorded the incident were still there, looking horrified. "We saw everything," one of them said quietly to Elena. "Your mom didn't do anything. That crazy lady just walked up and accused her of stealing and pulled out the bleach when your mom tried to walk away." As the paramedics wheeled Sophia out on a stretcher, Elena caught Deborah's eye. The woman had the audacity to look smug even as security detained her. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Elena said, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "But you're about to find out." What neither Elena nor Sophia knew then was that this attack would uncover a web of corruption within the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, and that the Rodriguez women were about to become unlikely catalysts for its complete dismantling. The emergency room buzzed with activity as Elena sat beside her mother's hospital bed, holding Sophia's trembling hand. The doctors had treated the chemical burns on her face and arms, but the real concern was her eyes. Sophia's right eye had received the brunt of the bleach spray, and the ophthalmologist warned there might be lasting damage. "We won't know the full extent until the swelling subsides," Dr. Petal explained, adjusting Sophia's IV. "But she was lucky you got her here so quickly." Lucky wasn't the word Elena would have chosen. She watched her mother's labored breathing, the angry red patches on her skin, and felt rage bubble up inside her, a sensation so foreign to her normally calm demeanor that it frightened her. A gentle knock on the doorframe interrupted her thoughts. A police officer stood there, notebook in hand. "Ms. Rodriguez, I'm Officer Gaines. I'd like to ask you and your mother some questions about the incident, if she's up to it." Elena nodded, squeezing her mother's hand reassuringly. Officer Gaines was professional and thorough, taking detailed notes as Sophia recounted the attack in a voice barely above a whisper. "I was washing my hands when she entered the bathroom. She looked at me strangely, then asked if I worked for the Hendersons. When I said yes, she became very angry, accused me of stealing from them. I told her I needed to go, and that's when she pulled out the small bottle from her purse." "And you've never had any previous interactions with Mrs. Whitman?" Officer Gaines asked. Sophia shook her head, then winced at the movement. "I've seen her at the house during HOA meetings, but we never spoke. She just lived through me." Elena interjected, "What's happening with her? Is she in custody?" Mrs. Whitman was detained at the scene and has been charged with assault, Officer Gaines explained. However, she's already posted bail. Her husband is apparently well connected with the district attorney's office. Of course, she was already free. Elena felt her jaw tighten. "We've obtained the video footage from the witnesses," Officer Gaines continued. "It clearly shows an unprovoked attack, so I don't want you to worry about proving what happened. The DA is considering additional hate crime charges given what was said during the attack." After the officer left, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Marco, her boyfriend of 2 years. He worked as a paralegal at one of the city's most prestigious law firms. "Just heard what happened. Jenkins wants to take your case pro bono. Call me." Within hours, Sophia's hospital room transformed into an impromptu command center. Marco arrived with his boss, Catherine Jenkins, a sharply dressed attorney whose reputation for taking down corporate bullies had earned her the nickname the Hammer in legal circles. What that woman did wasn't just assault, Catherine explained, reviewing the case notes. It was premeditated. The fact that she carried bleach in her purse suggests she planned to use it. And based on the witnesses' videos, there's clear evidence of racial animus. While they spoke, Elena's phone kept lighting up with notifications. The video of the attack had gone viral, with hashtags like #JusticeForSophia and #HOA Karen trending locally. "The Hendersons are on their way," Marco said, checking his own phone. "Patricia is apparently horrified by what happened." Elena scoffed. "I'll believe that when I see it." Catherine looked up from her tablet. "Actually, having the Hendersons on your side could be extremely valuable. Mrs. Whitman is claiming she acted to protect her friend's property from theft. If Patricia Henderson confirms your mother's employment and vouches for her character, it destroys that defense." When Patricia and Robert Henderson arrived 20 minutes later, Elena braced herself for excuses or, worse, accusations. Instead, Patricia rushed to Sophia's bedside, tears streaming down her face. "Oh my God, Sophia, I'm so sorry," she whispered, carefully taking the housekeeper's hand. "This is unforgivable." Robert Henderson, normally reserved and distant, looked genuinely disturbed. "We've already submitted our statements to the police," he told Elena. "And we've called an emergency HOA meeting for tomorrow. Deborah Whitman will be removed from her position immediately." "That's not enough," Elena said firmly. "My mother could have been blinded." "You're right," Patricia agreed, surprising everyone in the room. "It's not enough. Robert and I have been looking the other way for too long. Deborah and her husband have been running the HOA like their personal fiefdom, and we've all been too afraid of property values dropping to stand up to them." Catherine Jenkins leaned forward, interest piqued. "Mrs. Henderson, would you be willing to make a statement about other incidents involving the Whitmans? Patterns of behavior could be very relevant to our case." Patricia hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "Yes, and not just me. There are others in Oak Ridge who've been intimidated by the Whitmans for years. It's time someone stood up to them." As night fell, Sophia finally drifted to sleep under the influence of pain medication. Elena stood by the window, staring out at the city lights, when Marco joined her. "You know this is going to get ugly," he warned. "The Whitmans won't go down without a fight. They've got money, connections, and they're not afraid to use them." Elena watched her mother's chest rise and fall, the bandages on her face start white against her skin. "Let them try," she said quietly. "They picked the wrong family to mess with." What Elena didn't realize was that across town, Deborah Whitman was already plotting her counterattack, one that would target not just Sophia, but every person who had dared to stand against her that day. The days following the attack unfolded with dizzying speed. As Sophia recovered in the hospital, her story captured public attention far beyond what Elena could have imagined. Local news vans parked outside Oak Ridge Estates, reporters clamoring for statements from residents about the Bleach attack HOA president. Social media buzzed with outrage, a #, #JusticeForSophia spreading across platforms. By Wednesday morning, 3 days after the incident, the video had racked up over 2 million views. Deborah Whitman's name and face were plastered across news sites. Her previous life as a regional beauty pageant contestant and self-proclaimed community values advocate dissected by internet sleuths who uncovered a history of racist comments on private forums. Elena took a week's leave from her job as an elementary school teacher to stay with her mother. She converted their modest apartment's living room into a temporary bedroom so Sophia wouldn't have to navigate stairs with her still blurry vision. The ophthalmologist had confirmed that while there would be no permanent blindness, Sophia would need months of treatment for corneal damage. "You don't need to fuss so much, Major," Sophia protested as Elena arranged pillows behind her back. "I can manage." "Just let me take care of you for once," Elena replied, adjusting the television so her mother could see it more clearly. "Catherine is coming over to discuss the civil suit, and I want you comfortable." Sophia sighed. "I don't know about suing. Maybe we should just let it go now that she's been arrested." "Let it go." Elena stared at her mother incredulously. Mom, she attacked you with bleach. She could have blinded you. And for what? Because she assumed you were stealing. Before Sophia could respond, Elena's phone rang. It was Patricia Henderson. Elena, I'm so sorry to bother you, but there's something you need to know. Patricia's voice was tight with tension. Robert and I just got out of the emergency HOA meeting, and it didn't go as planned. What do you mean? Elena put the phone on speaker so her mother could hear. We motioned to remove Deborah as president, but her husband Gordon brought their lawyer. They're claiming she has a medical condition, some kind of stress-induced impulse control disorder, and that she's seeking treatment. Half the board bought it and voted to give her a leave of absence instead of removing her. Elena felt her blood pressure rising. You can't be serious. There's more, Patricia continued. They started a counter-narrative. Gordon is telling everyone that Sophia has been stealing from residents for years and that Deborah was just trying to make a citizen's arrest when things got out of hand. That's absurd. There were witnesses. I know, but Gordon's powerful in this community. He's threatening to tie up the HOA in expensive litigation if they remove Deborah. Some neighbors are already taking sides. When Catherine Jenkins arrived an hour later, Elena relayed Patricia's news. The attorney was unfazed. Typical defense strategy: muddy the waters, create doubt, shift blame to the victim, she said, setting her briefcase on the coffee table. But they've made a critical mistake. By claiming a medical condition, they've opened the door for us to subpoena Deborah's medical records. If this impulse control disorder magically appeared after the attack, well, no. Catherine spread several documents on the table. We're filing 2 suits, a civil suit against Deborah personally for assault, battery, and infliction of emotional distress, and a separate action against the HOA for negligence in appointing and retaining her as president despite previous incidents. Previous incidents? Sophia asked. Catherine smiled grimly. Patricia Henderson wasn't the only one who came forward. After the video went viral, we've had 5 other Oak Ridge residents contact us about harassment from the Whitmans. Most notably the Singh family, who Deborah tried to fine for cooking odors last year, and the Washingtons, who were threatened with eviction when they put up Black Lives Matter signs during the protests. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Turn on Channel 7 now. She grabbed the remote and switched to the local news. A reporter stood outside Oak Ridge Estates, microphone in hand. Developing story in the case that social media has dubbed Bleach Karen. Sources close to the Oak Ridge Estates HOA have provided our station with documents alleging financial improprieties by HOA President Deborah Whitman and her husband Gordon. These records appear to show nearly $300,000 in HOA funds diverted to personal projects, including renovations to the Whitmans' home and a family vacation described in the books as a community research trip. The camera cut to the news anchor. We've reached out to the Whitmans for comment on these allegations, but their attorney has declined to respond. Meanwhile, a district attorney has upgraded charges against Deborah Whitman to include assault with a caustic substance and is investigating potential hate crime enhancements. Elena turned to Catherine. Did you know about this? The attorney shook her head. Not about the financial improprieties, no, but it doesn't surprise me. People who abuse power rarely limit it to one area. Elena's phone rang again. This time it was Robert Henderson. Elena, is your mother with you? You both need to be careful. He sounded genuinely frightened. Gordon Whitman just stormed out of his house with a stack of papers. He's serving cease and desist letters to anyone who's spoken against Deborah, and he's threatening to sue the HOA and individual board members personally. He specifically mentioned coming to your apartment. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. He knows where we live. Deborah has access to all the employee records as HOA president. They know everything about your mother, where she lives, her immigration status, everything. Catherine immediately took the phone. Mr. Henderson, this is Catherine Jenkins. Tell Gordon Whitman that if he comes anywhere near the Rodriguez residence, I'll have a restraining order on his desk within the hour and add intimidation of witnesses to our growing list of charges. After hanging up, Catherine turned to Elena and Sophia. I don't want to alarm you, but we should take this threat seriously. People like the Whitmans are most dangerous when cornered. As if on cue, there was a pounding on the apartment door so violent that the hinges rattled. A man's voice bellowed from the hallway. Rodriguez, open this door. You've destroyed my wife's reputation with your lies, and you're going to pay. Alita moved protectively in front of her mother while Catherine calmly dialed 911. Mr. Whitman, Catherine called out while a phone rang. I'm Catherine Jenkins, attorney for the Rodriguez family. You're currently trespassing and harassing my clients. The police have been called, and every word you say is being recorded as evidence. The pounding stopped, followed by a moment of silence. This isn't over, Gordon Whitman hissed through the door. You have no idea who you're dealing with. As his footsteps receded down the hallway, Elena looked at her mother's frightened face and then at Catherine's determined one. No, Elena said quietly. He's the one who has no idea. What none of them realized was that the confrontation at their door had been filmed by a neighbor and was already uploading to social media, where it would catalyze a movement that would extend far beyond Oak Ridge Estates and one family's fight for justice. The video of Gordon Whitman's tirade at Alina's apartment door, captured by Mrs. Guzman from across the hall, became the catalyst that transformed a local scandal into a national conversation. Major news networks picked up the story, framing it as a microcosm of power abuse, racial tensions, and the sometimes toxic culture of HOAs across America. 2 weeks after the initial Bleach attack, Alina sat in Katherine Jenkins' office, watching CNN's coverage on a wall-mounted television. A panel of experts discussed the latest developments while a banner beneath them read, Bleach attack, Heavilo Courageinaction SCNDL expands. The story keeps evolving, Katherine remarked, turning down the volume. Yesterday, 3 former Oak Ridge maintenance workers came forward claiming they were fired after refusing to perform unpaid work on the Whitmans' property. And this morning, I received documentation showing that Gordon Whitman's construction company has been the sole bidder on every major HOA project for the past 6 years. Alina shook her head in disbelief. How did they get away with this for so long? Fear and apathy, Katherine replied. Most people don't want to rock the boat, especially when their home values are at stake. The Whitmans exploited that perfectly. Marco entered the conference room carrying a stack of folders. He'd taken a leave of absence from his regular job to work full-time on Sophia's case. You're going to want to see this, he said, spreading several documents across the table. Gordon Whitman filed for bankruptcy protection this morning. And look at the timing, just hours after the state attorney general announced an investigation into the HOA's finances. Katherine studied the bankruptcy filing with narrowed eyes. Classic move. He's trying to shield assets before the civil suits hit, but he made a crucial mistake. She pointed to a section of the document. He's claiming financial hardship due to recent unfounded allegations, but these bank transfers show he moved over $500,000 to an offshore account 3 days after the mall incident. That's not financial hardship, that's premeditated asset hiding. Alina's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. Patricia Henderson is here with news. Can come home? When Alina arrived at their apartment 30 minutes later, she found her mother sitting with Patricia at the kitchen table. Sophia's eye patches had been replaced with special protective glasses, a sign of her improving condition. But it was Patricia who caught Alina's attention. The normally composed woman looked disheveled, with dark circles under her eyes. Alina, I'm glad you're here, Patricia said, her voice strained. Robert and I received this in the mail today. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a formal letter from Gordon Whitman's attorney, threatening to sue the Hendersons for defamation, breach of fiduciary duty, and malicious interference with business interests. The demand, $2.5 million in damages. He's suing every board member who voted to remove Deborah, Patricia explained. Most of them are terrified. The Millers already caved and issued a public apology. Alina felt a flash of anger. So they're intimidating people into silence. It gets worse, Patricia continued. There's a special HOA meeting tonight. Gordon has called for a vote of confidence. If enough residents support them, the Whitmans will remain in power despite everything. Sophia reached for Alina's hand. We need to be there. Mom, no. You're still recovering. This affects all of us, Sophia insisted. These people try to destroy my reputation and hurt me because of who I am. I won't hide while they continue hurting others. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center was packed that evening. Residents filled every seat, with latecomers standing along the walls. The tension in the room was palpable as Gordon Whitman took the podium, Deborah seated behind him looking simultaneously victimized and defiant. Neighbors, friends, Gordon began with practiced sincerity. My family has served this community faithfully for years. We've maintained property values, kept our streets safe, and preserved the standard of living we all move here to enjoy. He paused, surveying the room. Recent events have been distorted by social media and opportunistic lawyers. My wife made a mistake, one she deeply regrets, but it was a single lapse in judgment caused by medication issues, not the character assassination it's been portrayed as. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alina, seated with her mother, Marco, and the Hendersons in the back row, felt her stomach tighten as she noticed several residents nodding in agreement. Tonight, Gordon continued, we're asking for your support to continue our work protecting Oak Ridge Estates from outside influences that would divide us and undermine our community values. The coded language wasn't lost on Alina. She glanced at her mother, who sat straight back despite her injuries, dignity intact. We'll now open the floor for comments before the vote, announced the acting secretary, a nervous-looking man who kept glancing at Gordon. To everyone's surprise, Robert Henderson stood first. The typically reserved executive walked deliberately to the microphone. I've lived in Oak Ridge for 15 years, he began quietly. In that time, I've prioritized my comfort and my property value over everything else. I told myself that wasn't my business when the Singh family was harassed out of their home for cooking odors. I looked the other way when the Washingtons received daily fines for their yard signs. I convinced myself these were necessary sacrifices to maintain our standard of living. He turned to face Gordon directly. But when I saw Sofia Rodriguez, a woman who has cleaned my home for years with nothing but integrity, lying in a hospital bed because your wife assaulted her with bleach, I couldn't hide from the truth anymore. This isn't about property values. It's about basic human decency. A tense silence followed his words. Then Patricia Henderson stood, joining her husband. The Whitmans have been embezzling HOA funds for years. I have the documentation to prove it. She held up a flash drive. Every resident will receive a copy of these records tonight. You'll see exactly where your dues have been going, from their kitchen renovation labeled as a community improvement project to their daughter's wedding disguised as an Oak Ridge social event. Gordon lunged toward Patricia, but Robert stepped between them. Touch my wife, and I'll add assault to the charges. Suddenly, residents were standing throughout the room. Mrs. Singh, who had moved to a neighboring community after the harassment, spoke about how Deborah had organized a petition to evict her family. Mr. Washington detailed the late-night threatening phone calls he'd received after putting up yard signs. A former maintenance worker described being forced to install a pool at the Whitman residence using HOA supplies. One by one, people found their voices, sharing stories that had previously gone untold out of fear or indifference. When the testimonials finally ended, the acting secretary called for the vote of confidence. The result was overwhelming. 118 against the Whitmans, 7 in favor. As Gordon and Deborah Whitman were escorted from the community center, Alina noticed something remarkable happening. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other for years were exchanging phone numbers, making plans, offering support to those who had been victimized. Patricia approached Sophia, tears in her eyes. I am so sorry for what happened to you. And I'm sorry it took something this terrible to make us stand up. Sophia, ever gracious, took Patricia's hand. What matters is that you stood up now. Outside in the parking lot, Alina watched as Gordon and Deborah climbed into their luxury SUV. Gordon caught her eye and rolled down his window. You think this is over? He called out. This community will fall apart without us. Property values will plummet. Crime will rise. You'll all come begging us to return. Alina walked slowly toward their vehicle, aware of neighbors gathering behind her in silent support. No, Mr. Whitman, she said calmly. What's over is your ability to prey on people's fears. What's beginning is something much more valuable than property values, a real community. As the Whitmans drove away, Alina didn't realize just how prophetic her words would prove to be. The final chapter of the battle was yet to come, but the tide had irrevocably turned. The HOA that had been a weapon would soon become a shield for the very people it once oppressed. 6 months after the Bleach attack, Alina stood at the podium in Oak Ridge Estates' renovated community center, addressing a room filled with residents, reporters, and community activists. Behind her hung the banner reading Oak Ridge Community Alliance, Stronger Together. When my mother was attacked, Alina began, her voice steady and clear. I thought we were fighting one woman's hatred and one man's corruption. What I didn't understand then was that we were actually challenging an entire system designed to exclude and intimidate. Today, we celebrate not just our victory in court, but our transformation as a community. The journey to this moment had been arduous and at times seemed impossible. 3 weeks after the HOA vote, Gordon Whitman had made good on his threats, filing lawsuits against 27 Oak Ridge residents, including Alina, Sophia, and the Hendersons. The legal onslaught was meant to bankrupt them with legal fees and forced settlements. But Gordon had underestimated the movement he was facing. Catherine Jenkins assembled a coalition of civil rights attorneys who took on the cases pro bono. Meanwhile, a legal defense fund for Oak Ridge residents raised over $350,000 in just 10 days, with contributions coming from across the country. The criminal case against Deborah progressed steadily. Despite her attempts to claim diminished capacity due to medication, the premeditated nature of the attack, evidenced by the travel-sized bleach bottle in her purse, undermined her defense. The viral video and multiple witness testimonies left little room for doubt. Last month, Deborah Whitman had finally faced justice. In a plea agreement to avoid hate crime enhancements, she pleaded guilty to assault with a caustic substance and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, along with mandated cultural sensitivity training and community service upon release. Gordon's fate proved even more dramatic. The Attorney General's investigation into the HOA finances revealed a pattern of embezzlement dating back nearly a decade. His attempt to hide assets through bankruptcy failed when offshore transfers were traced directly to accounts in his name. 3 days ago, he had been indicted on 34 counts of fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. His construction company was shuttered, its assets frozen pending criminal proceedings. But the transformation of Oak Ridge Estates went far beyond the Whitmans' legal troubles. The community had fundamentally reinvented itself. Alina gestured to the diverse group seated on the stage behind her, the newly elected Community Alliance Board, which had replaced the former HOA structure. Patricia Henderson sat alongside Mr. Washington, Mrs. Singh, who had moved back to the community, Mrs. Guzman, and Alina's mother, Sophia, whose eye had healed remarkably well, though she still occasionally wore protective glasses in bright light. When we examined the HOA bylaws that the Whitmans had used as weapons, Alina continued, we discovered they've been illegally modified over the years to concentrate power and minimize oversight. With legal guidance, we've completely restructured our governance to focus on true community needs rather than arbitrary rule enforcement. The changes were substantial. HOA fees have been reduced by 30% now that kickbacks and embezzlement were eliminated. The former punitive fine system was replaced with a community mediation program for disputes. Restrictive covenants about home appearances were relaxed to allow for cultural expressions, religious symbols, and personal expression. A community assistance fund was established to help residents facing hardship with home repairs and maintenance. Most significantly, the new bylaws included specific anti-discrimination provisions with real accountability measures, the first of their kind for a homeowners association in the state. The attack on my mother revealed the ugliness that can fester when we prioritize property over people, Alina said, but also showed us the power of standing together. She looked at Sophia, who smiled back with tears in her eyes. My mother taught me that true dignity isn't about where you live or what you own. It's about how you treat others, especially those who seem different from you. That lesson is now written into the very foundation of our community. The settlement from the civil case against the Whitmans had been substantial. Beyond covering Sophia's medical expenses and lost wages, the family received damages that allowed Alina to reduce her teaching hours and focus on community organizing. She had recently been appointed to the city's Housing Equity Task Force, where she was helping other communities implement the Oak Ridge model of governance. As Alina concluded her remarks, she invited Sophia to join her at the podium. Her mother walked forward slowly but steadily, no longer showing signs of the physical trauma she had endured. My daughter speaks of dignity, Sophia said softly into the microphone, her accent more pronounced when she was emotional. But she doesn't tell you that when I was lying in the hospital, I wanted to give up. I wanted to quit my job, move away, hide from the hatred I experienced. She looked out at the assembled residents, many of whom she had cleaned for over the years. Alina told me then, Mom, if we run, nothing changes. But if we stand, everything can change. I didn't believe her. Sophia smiled. But my daughter, she is stubborn. And she was right. The audience rose in a standing ovation as mother and daughter embraced. What had begun as a vicious attack motivated by prejudice had catalyzed a movement for change that extended far beyond Oak Ridge Estates. In the months since the incident, 3 neighboring communities had adopted similar governance models, abandoning traditional HOA structures in favor of more equitable and inclusive approaches. The media coverage had prompted state legislators to propose the Rodriguez Act, which would establish oversight requirements for homeowners associations and prohibit discriminatory practices in housing governance statewide. As the applause continued, Alina spotted a familiar face at the back of the room, Dr. Patel, the ophthalmologist who had treated Sophia in the emergency room. She had come to the celebration at Alina's invitation, curious to see the full impact of her patient's recovery. Later, as residents mingled at the reception, drinking champagne and sharing stories of the neighborhood's transformation, Dr. Patel approached Alina. When I treat patients, she said, I hope for their physical healing. But what you've accomplished here goes far beyond that. You've turned personal trauma into community healing. Alina shook her head. We all did it together. My mother and I were just a spark. Across the room, Sophia sat with Patricia Henderson and several other former employers, women who had once seen her only as the help, but now listened attentively as she shared her ideas for the community garden project. Outside, through the community center windows, Alina could see children playing on the newly renovated playground, children of different races, backgrounds, and economic circumstances, moving freely in a space that now belonged equally to all of them. The Whitmans had assumed their wealth and status made them untouchable, that intimidation and fear would keep their neighbors in line forever. They had seen Sophia Rodriguez as nothing more than a servant who needed to be put in her place. In doing so, they had inadvertently sparked a revolution that ultimately cost them everything, their reputation, their freedom, and the very power they had abused so casually. As Alina rejoined her mother, she reflected on how the worst day of their lives had ultimately led to this moment of triumph. The price for the Whitmans' actions had indeed been steep, but the reward for standing against them had proven immeasurably greater. Justice had been served, not just in the courts, but in the profound transformation of a community that had found its conscience, its voice, and its heart